In the first chapter, 12 of Parashat Tazriah, we hear about the woman who gives birth and how she becomes impure if she gives birth to a boy for a period of 7 days and a further 33 days before she can eat terumah, making a total of 40 days. And how bizarrely that if she gives birth to a baby girl, this is twice the amount of time, 14 days of impurity, 66 days of not eating terumah, making 80. Why is it that a woman giving birth, which is clearly the most creative, beautiful thing that you could do in this world, it is the closest thing we can get to becoming Tzelem Elokim, in the image of God, because we created another human being. Why is that process producing for the mother a state of impurity? And not only that, why is it that the state of impurity is double the length of time when she gives birth to a baby girl as opposed to a baby boy? And just after this, we're told that for a boy, the boy has to be circumcised at the 8th day. We know that already. Why are you repeating that here? And we learn in Pasuk 8, where after she's given the sacrifice, the Kohen purifies her, as it says, V'chaper alea haKohen v'tahera. What is the Kohen purifying her from? What has she done that needs purification? And furthermore, last week we read in Shemini how the kosher foods, kosher animals and non-kosher animals, we're not told that when a kosher animal gives birth to a baby animal that its mother becomes impure. What is going on, and why are these laws concerning the birth for the mother? And the Alshech suggests two possible suggestions. The first is that because the pain of giving birth is so high, the mother might have sworn that she would never become pregnant again. And this is something that's overcome the joy of having the baby. But when it comes to giving birth to a girl, that joy is tempered by the fact that the realization from the mother that she's giving birth to a child who's herself going to incur the pain of childbirthing. And for this reason, the Alshech is suggesting that the period of purification is twice as long. The second reason is a much deeper reason, and that is that the Alshech says that when God creates man, He created him in a state of purity. In fact, Adam Rishon was already circumcised. But when woman creates man, because the birth was after the impregnation of Chava by the impurity of the snake, it was decreed that everything that the woman gives birth to it comes out in a state of defilement, which is a result of the menstrual blood which the woman incurs as a result of Hashem's punishment for her act in the sin of eating from the tree of good and evil. So from the moment the child is born, it's engaged already with the act of regaining that purity. Now for a boy, that purity is regained through the act of circumcision. And that's why the Torah here reminds us that on the 8th day, the boy has to be circumcised. And for the girl, the process of purification is much longer, which is why we need a much longer purification time. It reflects the fact that because the woman introduced impurity into the world, that when she gives birth to another female, that length of cleansing the impurity takes much longer. And now let's go to chapter 13, where we're introduced to the laws of Tazriah. By the way, what is the connection between giving birth and Tazriah? Notice that the giving birth is the most natural thing we can do in this world, and Tazriah is no longer a common phenomena here. There is, however, a link. And what's the link? But before we go into that, let me just ask you a question. If you experience pain, is that a good thing or a bad thing? You would think that pain is a bad thing, and yet, if I give you an example, if you put your hand on a fire, and if you didn't experience that pain and not release the hand immediately, and if you kept that hand there, you'd incur severe damage to the body. And therefore, pain is actually a great gift from God to advise us, to warn us that something is amiss, something is wrong. And the earlier we read those messages of pain, the less impactful the next set of messages have to be. This idea that affliction is beneficial is echoed in Jeremiah chapter 2:19, which says, "Your evil acts have disciplined you." And this idea is further expounded on in Pirkei Avot, chapter 4:13, which says that anyone that creates a sin creates a negative angel, which comes to haunt that person. And that this state of impurity is caused by that person's actions. Now, we don't experience Tzaraat anymore, but in the time when it was applicable, having Tzaraat was actually a compliment. In what way? Because we said that Tzaraat inflicts Adam. Adam is the highest form of description of a human being. And it means that because the action you did is so foreign to your normal attributes of midot, that it expresses itself in the form of a skin disease, a skin surface disease. But if you were habitually making that sin, then you wouldn't notice the effect that impurity would have on your skin, because the majority of your midot are in that way. So getting the skin experience of tzaraat was actually a compliment to say that you are actually generally living your life at a very high plane. And this one misdemeanor, because it's so different from what you practice normally, is showing up as a foreign entity. But we can understand that this is a spiritual disease. So the Alshech explains what is the difference between a physical disease and a spiritual disease. The physical disease, the Alshech says, is caused by a person action. And when you're involved in that, you don't have the strength to pull yourself out of that, the consequences of that. And therefore, you need a doctor who, through the help of Hashem, can pull you out of that situation. With regards to the spiritual disease, this is entirely caused by a misdemeanor in your action and is a physical manifestation of that spiritual problem. In both cases, Hashem is the healer, as it says in Exodus, chapter 15, verse 26, that Ani Adonai Rofecha, I am your healer. So in both cases, Hashem is a healer. But in the case of a spiritual disease, instead of going to a doctor, you're asked to go to the priest, who is the representative of Hashem, and through him, Hashem heals you. In other words, for a spiritual disease, there's no point going to a doctor who's familiar with the natural cures of through nature, but you have to go to a spiritual entity like the Kohen, who can clarify whether you are actually diseased or not. So the Kohen doesn't actually heal you; he just clarifies your status. Like if he sees that if you have tzaraat, then he would claim that you have tzaraat, and from that moment onwards, you have tzaraat. And the Alshech offers a very interesting spiritual explanation for this. And that is that we know from before that all negative forces feed off Kedusha, feed off purity. And so they attach themselves to this person who's made evil speech that's caused tzaraat. And by the Kohen stating that this person is contaminated with tzaraat and is impure, there is, so to speak, nothing for the impurity forces to latch onto, because the purity has been removed from that person from the perspective of the evil forces. And so as a result of the going to the Kohen and him stating that you have become impure, that halts the attack of the negative forces onto you. And without that, there would not just be a skin disease, it would penetrate actually into the body. So in a way, the priest actually halts the further degradation of the disease but doesn't cure it. So who cures it? We're told that the reason for tzaraat is caused by evil language, evil talk, lashon hara, and so the consequences of that is that you're put in isolation for 7 days. And we're a social being, so isolation is the worst punishment you can give a person. But in that place of quietness, of stillness, is the perfect environment to really look inwards and analyze, where did I go wrong? What did I do to have caused this disease to come upon me? And it's the result of that 7 days of isolation that you can actually really do the inner work to produce the teshuvah, and it's that teshuvah that begins the healing process. But even after you've done the teshuvah, the skin disease disappears. You're still in a state of impurity, and the Kohen comes and clarifies that you have reached that level of teshuvah and removed the negative forces from you. At that stage, you still can't go back into the community, engaging in the community, until you do the sacrifices and the special ritual that finally produces the final purification. And this is another law that we have, and that is that although you can contaminate yourself in a second, the process of healing, both physically and spiritually, always takes a lot longer. And part of that time and purity and process is the humility that you comprehend as a result of the extra long time it takes to heal, and as a deterrent for you to say the lashon hara again next time. And why is the isolation for 7 days? Because 7 days alludes to the 7 days of creation, and it's also an allusion to the 70 years of life that you have, and you have to reflect upon what it is that you want to achieve in your life. And that's part of the teshuvah process. And if you do the teshuvah properly, you will come to the conclusion that the whole world was created for your benefit. The whole world was worth being created for your sake. And in conclusion, the Gemara in Erechin, chapter 16, talks about 7 courses for tzaraat. The first is evil gossip. The second is bloodshed. The third is sexual immorality. The fourth is false oaths. The fifth is arrogance. The sixth is robbery. And the seventh is envy. So in conclusion, we see from all of this that how important it is to retain a sense of purity so that we can retain our closeness to God, who is the essence of purity. And the big lessons for me, and really my bracha to you, is this, that if you do have to go to a doctor, because the words of the doctor are so powerful. In other words, if the doctor diagnoses you incorrectly with a disease, your body will actually behave as if it has that disease. And so if you have to go to a doctor that will give you good news. Shabbat Shalom. God bless you next week.